This episode of The Crossroads is sponsored by Glitz and Gems. Corey Green decided to start making soap and today is bringing vegan, organic, and affordable products to the market. And the best part? They're shaped like gems. She has the Ice Me Out collection, the Glam Goddess collection with gem-shaped body scrubs, soaps, and lotions. Can't decide what to order? Not a problem. Corey has got you covered with a sample kit so you can discover your favorites. All products are available on Glitz in Gems. And remember, the Z's on the end of glitzandgems.com. And you can check out the Glitz and Gems Etsy page as well. That's glitzandgems.com. Let's start the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I am your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. And today, not only is there some melanin, there's some white allyship too. I'm joined by my friend Franz. Hi, Franz.
Hey, Rashida.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. No complaints. I'm hanging in there. It's like it's raining here on the East Coast. So that's been nice. I've just been sort of like hanging loose and listening to some white noise and with the lights off and just chilling out. This has been a very, very long week. This episode is very much so delayed, but that is all right. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but before we get there, I want to give some flowers. So giving flowers today to the queen bee herself, who doesn't even need for me to continue on. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Black is King is out today, and I fully intend, once I am done recording this, to go have my spirit dipped in excellence. So I'm giving flowers to the god, Beyonce, today. Franz, who do you want to give some flowers to?
I guess I'll give flowers to AOC. She's had a rough week as well.
She did have a rough week. She did. But she really stood up for us.
Yeah.
So that's a good pick. I really was very impressed by her speech.
Yeah.
How did you react to it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonated with this is not new. Like, this rhetoric is everyday towards women, aggression and violent language against women. And so everyone's just sort of used to it, but it's actually not okay. So really, really strong speech. So thank you, AOC.
Yeah, Yoho picked the wrong one.
Yeah.
He picked the wrong fucking one. You know, you live and you learn.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I mean, it doesn't seem that like we're going that direction, but hopefully, eventually.
Hopefully, eventually. That's all I can say about it is like eventually my hope is that we will get out of this place and that we will get into something new and better because we can see how bad it can be.
Right.
So that's all we can do. That's all we can do. So let's get into it. So this episode is, let's frame this. So this is going to be a discussion about some real current events, things that are happening right now, real time. And I asked Franz to come back on the show. You know, if you've been listening to the show, listened to the podcast, you know that Franz was actually on the 5th episode entitled The Hands That Feed, where she talked about her experience in food service and the feelings of her own personal food insecurity while working as a caterer in LA. So another cool thing about Franz, and I know I said I let her introduce herself, but I feel like she's not going to give it the way I'm going to give it. So I'm going to give it. So Franz at like a very early age was like blonde Daria, and decided that she was like not down with life as she knew it, and decided to just fly on down to pump on over to Europe and go to school in France. And she lived in China and Siberia for a bit, and she's real cultured. So I wanted her to come on the show and talk some about her experience living in China, but also really talking about currently that there's massive flooding going on in China. There's also flooding, or has been flooding, in Texas. We're in the midst of hurricane season, so there's a lot going on, especially around water. So, Franz, now that I've given you the speech that I thought would be fitting for you, please introduce yourself, fill in the gaps that I didn't fill in, and talk, about your experience living in China.
Okay, thank you, Rashida. I am a recent graduate from urban sustainability at Antioch University, and with Rashida. And I did work in the food industry for quite a while in Los Angeles, and it's 100 degrees and dry here in Los Angeles. And I think something, although along with my experience living in China, my the direction I'm going in right now is sort of disaster planning and how that affects people, but also the environment and the urban environment. So, since you're talking about China, then I'll I'll give a personal experience to start with, I guess. And that was when I was living in Harbin in northern China in Heilongjiang province. There was a chemical explosion at a benzene factory.
What?
Yes, benzene is used in sort of like plastics and manufacturing or whatever, but it's highly toxic and very carcinogenic. And that entered the Songhua River, and no one said anything. It was very private and kept secret until because the river went to Russia, they actually had to disclose the information that it was carrying masses of benzene into Russia. Otherwise, I'm not sure how long or if that would have ever really gotten out. But the water was shut off for a few days, but then
What's a few days?
I can't remember exactly, but it was 2 to 3 days, and then nothing changed
Okay.
in terms of the toxicity of the water. But because toilets not being on caused other problems, they turned the water back on and
Mm-hmm.
just gave strong suggestions not to drink or bathe in the water. Um, I don't really know what other people did, but I did not drink or bathe the water. And restaurants were closed. It was sort of similar to the quarantine, actually. Restaurants were closed, um, shelves were bare at the market. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
an overall sense of sort of panic of what's next? What are we going to do? Is this the end type of thing? Which I wrote a blog on, and that's published for Antioch's literary journal Lunch Ticket. Um,
Whoop whoop.
but yeah, after 2 weeks of rations and sort of waiting, the foreign students, at least, were, or the students in my specific program at Harbin Institute of Technology, transferred to the Beijing headquarters of the program that I was doing. So I got to leave after a few weeks, and other people had to stay
Mm-hmm.
and live through this longer. And I definitely felt my privilege or luck it made me specifically think about the environment and the direction we're going with toxic manufacturing practices. And it also, which I learned later, was a wake up call for China in terms of
Hmm.
the cultural saving face, sort of fear of disappointing the government or the people, and so not being straightforward about things that happen that are actually really harmful. And so there was, at least for a little while, and this was in 2005, in terms of environmental damage, it's more important for you to be transparent than to have sort of cultural respect and um, not being a disappointment. But
Hmm.
I think that also has diminished once again because with the flooding recently, the Chinese media is not picking up any of these stories, and or at least not a lot of them. And
Yeah, it seems very limited. Yeah.
yeah, and there's no comment from the government and these types of things. So I guess maybe it's gone sort of back to the way it was, but at that time it was sort of the wake up call of like we need to be transparent because people can die and ecosystems are crushed, etc. But
But for, and and like for context, you were not told exactly when the spill occurred that there was contamination to the water, right?
it had been um, it was 5 days from the explosion that the province told Beijing, the government in Beijing, about what
Hmm.
happened. And then it took another week or two or something um, to get to Harbin. So it was long before I learned and the water was shut off that this occurred. So who knows exactly how long the water source was tainted, but
Hmm.
um, definitely before anyone knew or were able to take actions against it
So
to
regarding
protect people.
China, and their dam infrastructure, and this is something that, I've talked about dams, or at least beginning to have the conversation about dams on a previous episode. And China has a shit ton of dams. Like, what is it, like 87,000?
I've read a few different numbers, but yeah, it's approximately
Hmm.
90,000 dams in China for for electricity, but also what has become apparent is for, well, not just for drought, um, for avoiding droughts, but for
Hmm.
having the power of keeping the water. Um, for example, the Mekong River, it should sustain about 60 million people, and it is upstream in China. It starts in China and it's upstream from 18 other countries that this one river is supposed to support.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the dams on this river are causing droughts in other countries, specifically in 2018. Vietnam and
Hmm.
Thailand had a horrible drought, and China was just like, oh, that's a bummer, but didn't disclose that their dams were full. Um,
Right.
so, yeah, it is definitely becoming sort of a power, and not just electricity power, but a power dynamic. And they are winning with the
Yeah.
amount of water that.
They can stockpile. Because, like having access to clean drinking water, or having access to water for irrigation for crops is a major, major issue that, I know there have been some small initiatives that we've seen in the US that are supposed to help to address these issues of lack of adequate, drinking water, but it is a problem. And this doesn't even really call into question like the rivers that are so polluted, that can't even be used for drinking, that can't even people can't even use at all. So like let's also talk about, dams and their impact on the ecosystem. Like,
Yeah, and just one more thing about the Mekong is that Asia is one of the driest continents, and so these water wars are just at the beginning, and um, and so China's definitely in the lead there. But for example, the infamous Three Gorges Dam project that oh god,
What's
I don't
that
know.
joke?
It's just it makes me laugh because I've just been reading about it um, for most of my life since I moved to China when I was 16, and there was already tons of literature about this project and what it would do and displacing people and how it would wipe out many ecosystems with flooding or drought, and yet
Hmm.
they're still sort of tapping away at it,
Yeah.
despite what the scientists and environmentalists have warned. And it's
Mm.
also very dangerous because, well, I guess most of the hydropower in China, um, the dams are built close to heavily populated areas, and that's really dangerous because
Right.
there's always a possibility of not just flooding, which we've seen this year in extreme measures, and lots of the dams
Extreme.
have collapsed, but also
mm-hmm.
with increased disease, um,
Mm.
lots of waterborne illnesses, and then since we're in the middle of a pandemic now, one can only imagine all the other diseases that can be caused when um, the ecosystems are out of balance and areas that used to have running water and are now having stagnant water, and
Right.
which is also affecting the animals and plants, um, and well, everything. So
Everything.
it's
Everything.
the same old scenario that we're faced with every day now is that the human impact that we've chosen to do, or that our forefathers have chosen for us,
Mm-hmm.
we're not evolving fast enough for all the environmental changes because it's so
Yeah. I
extreme each
mean,
year.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
we're up to 9 named storms, and this is the first year that this has happened since 2005. And since you brought up the year 2005, there was also another major hurricane that we all are very aware of, which was Hurricane Katrina. And, shifting into, shifting just a little bit into hurricanes and flooding, um, just thinking about hurricanes and how they form. So I won't get too deep because I know that I have a habit sometimes of going ham with the science. But what I will say is that, hurricanes, since we've talked about the water cycle before, the component of the water cycle that gives hurricanes their power is evaporation. So that's when the water is being, is getting full of energy. The water is warm in the tropics where hurricanes form, and the water droplets are rising and ascending and into the atmosphere. And obviously with more and more water coming into the atmosphere, clouds are forming, and it's just a giant spiral that is fueled by warm water. So when we're talking about climate change, one of the things that we have to bring into the conversation is that the waters are getting warmer. They're getting warmer because of the greenhouse gases that are trapped and are not being released, and it's causing a general a warming of the planet. And obviously the planet's reaction is, oh God. And just like if you were running a marathon, or for anybody in this pandemic who's only been eating, if you had to run to the mailbox and back, you're going to start to sweat. And that's what the planet is doing. But on the top of all this, the waters are still, they're acidifying and they're warming. So what does that mean? That means there's more fuel for bad weather. There's more fuel for hurricanes. And we've got a couple that are, one in particular that we know everybody is keeping an eye on. And that one is, I'm probably going to butcher this name, but Isaias, it's now a hurricane. I think it's over Puerto Rico. It was going towards it's over the Bahamas, and it's making its track on up to Florida as we speak. It was trending on Twitter a few minutes ago. So, and it's not to say that this is going to be like the one that knocks our socks off. But again, this is the 9th named storm. We already had another Hurricane Hannah that hit Texas and caused massive flooding. So like these coastal cities are getting the brunt of excess flooding. And on top of that, we have dams. Like what do you think? I mean, for God's sake, what do you think China's end game is? Just whatever, like out of curiosity.
I think that the end game is actually, I think it's similar to everywhere else that is trying to figure out the future and how to power all of the huge populations that we are now reaching, human populations.
Yeah.
And sort of going down in resources. So they kept going with the Three Gorges Dam despite the warnings, because that was a huge part of their green power initiative. And how are they going to get off coal? So at root, these things are positive and thoughtful for the people, maybe not necessarily the land, but and animals.
Certainly for the people.
The people, positive for the people. And I think everyone's just trying to figure out what next steps to make, because we don't have any clue what the future's going to look like. But also, I mean, we do know, and especially developers and governments do know, that it's not getting any better. It is getting worse. So despite what your politics and side you're on, and like believing science, the developers do believe that the sea levels are rising, that there's worse storms, that there's more droughts, and those things all are included in like the economy of investments and the global economy, of course, but the real estate and everything. Those people in charge of that are believing that this is not going away. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess like the end game would be that they're just trying to figure out something after sticking to this plan that like was originated with Sun Yat-sen and Mao Zedong, and now inherited to the present.
So I definitely think that we're in the crossroads, because we've talked about the flooding and the issues with the dams in China. We've also kind of touched on and talked about the dam infrastructure issues we have in America. I mean, we have 90 some thousand, I think it's 91,000 estimated dams, and a lot of them are privately owned, like the dam that I talked about in Michigan that had collapsed, and this isn't new. Dams collapse all the time. I believe there was a dam that collapsed in California back in like 2017. I think that's the Oroville Dam. And that also collapsed. It's like these things occur all the time, and mostly what the concern that we most immediately gravitate toward is the of course, loss of life, but also loss of property. But we don't think about what's also happening, which is there's the natural flow of rivers. Not only does it feed everything along the banks and the shores, it flows into our oceans, but also it flows through what should be like the wetlands. But when the water cannot flow the way that it needs to, those areas become dry, and there's loss of vegetation, which causes the loss of animals that depend on that vegetation to eat and survive. And I think we have to call that into the equation too. And I'm sure people are like, well, why does it matter? It matters more that people are losing their homes. And I would say it's just as important that vegetation can't grow due to drought, then it and loses its home and its place, as it is for you to lose your 2 bedroom. You know what I'm saying? So just want to call that into the conversation. If you're lucky enough to have a 2 bedroom, because we all know that there is a massive housing crisis. I've talked about this on the show as well, and kind of bringing it back to out of dams and out of flooding, and really talking about what's going on in this time, which is also a high alert time. We're trying to figure out the best way to go forward. Something that came up during, an interview with Urban Habitat was the juggle, or the balance between, wanting to take climate action, but also realizing that there is a housing crisis. So with you personally, and maybe not, if you don't want to, but, how has like dealing with COVID impacted your ability to focus on, urban planning or urban development? Like, where has your overall focus been during this time, and how have you managed to balance your experience with COVID with like the work that you're trying to accomplish?
I mean, I think that everyone had to go through a sort of assimilation period to life post COVID, or and how different it is. But after that sort of period, which was exhausting emotionally and psychologically, especially, but also physically, fear is always exhausting. But I think that in terms of the work, the impact it has had on work and thoughts about the future, especially thinking about disaster era cities, and what we're facing at the moment. It was basically just living what,
Hmm.
in theory, we've thought about and talked about so many times in terms of
Right.
sustainability and climate change is coming, it's coming. Oh yeah, well it's
Oh,
here,
well, it's
and
here.
obviously we've seen so many examples throughout the last couple decades, but I think more
Right.
people are affected by this, especially because it's not like, oh, there was a hurricane in um, Texas. It's if you don't live in Texas, people don't necessarily really care. And so
Right. Right.
this is
Until it's them.
affecting everyone, and it's affecting the economy, which is, a, it's really, really difficult, because if you aren't lucky enough to have a job where you can work from home, you are facing
Hmm.
um, disease, death, and anything else you can imagine, or homelessness, poverty, not being able to eat or feed your family. So really difficult choices, but um, it's also interesting to see socially what has happened during these times of catastrophe and the times where you're surprised by someone's kindness and the many times that you are dismayed by
Oh God.
the, the greed
Oh
and the hoarding and
Jesus.
the
Oh God.
antagonism of people. So it's, um, I guess, in terms of thinking about my work, it's really an anthropological experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are like on your own personal social experiment right now. But like going back to your time in Harbin, like what did you how did you what did you do to adapt? Like when you first received the notice like, "Hey girls, the water's a little bad." Like, what'd you do?
um, Again, I do think it was very similar to the recent COVID um, stuff because the shock level and like you don't really know what's happening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Also because no one else knows what's happening, and so there's not
Right.
some sort of answer or task list really. Like, sure, wear masks, get um, hand sanitizer, sure, but
Right.
what does life look like for you anymore? Like, are you even able to make money anymore? Will you have a house? These were all things that I faced. And
Mm-hmm.
so in Harbin, it was like, should I leave by myself? Should I stay? Because I had to finish the semester, or I would be a semester behind and like wasted money. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, like you start thinking, or I did, in terms of pragmatics and practicality. What can I do? What should I do? What are the risks? And then just kind of try to get through the day. The first few days, the
Yeah.
first few days when the markets were empty in Harbin, because everyone was like, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
turn off the water, so everyone bought every beverage possible everywhere, except randomly beer, which I definitely,
Hmm.
I definitely found the opposite to be the case in LA with COVID.
Yeah.
Like there was
Oh
tons of
my
water,
God.
but like no booze. Um,
Yeah.
um, but I wasn't lucky enough to even know early to go to the store. So by the time I found out,
Mm-hmm.
everything was gone. So
Oh my God.
I didn't have any water for probably 3 days. And that was
Yeah.
scary because like it's not just about being like thirsty. It's a reminder of life and death.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you need to
And
survive?
Yeah.
it's like, talking about COVID, I mean, just like you were saying about like the scarcity in the stores, that was just, I think it's definitely changed some of my habits. Like my life has kind of flipped in the sense that, I used to want to care about how I dress and I wanted to look fashionable and now I really don't care. I have clothes that I wear, but as far as like caring about being fashionable right now, it's like the furthest thing from my mind, which is terrible because I've got some things coming that are going to require me to care about that kind of shit. So I got to tighten up. But it's just been a complete reversal in terms of going back to what matters. Like you were saying, like having water is a necessity. Everything else, going out to dinner, maybe not so much.
I mean, and looking at sort of how many people have dealt with the pandemic through like watching TV or these types
Hmm.
of things, when you don't have that access to that or similar screen video games or whatever people are doing to escape
Right.
the reality, um,
Yeah.
it's also it's the reminder of you know reality, but it also is a reminder of like your body and where you are in the planet and what you're facing if you're not sort of turned off in that way. And it's I definitely didn't have um, any sort of technology. This was still like 2005. I didn't have
Hmm.
a phone, so
Right.
I didn't have Wi-Fi or anything else too. So a couple bootleg DVDs, but but it's important. I feel like I think that people are getting so far away from, let's say, something that we need like water,
Mm-hmm.
and just avoiding the fact that we have poisoned our water and we're continuing to do so,
Yeah.
and not being able to sort of face that. And so, what else do you
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
is escape it, which I definitely do when I can't handle
Yeah,
it
but you know
anymore.
what? It reminds me of, what
So,
prompted us to talk about food in the first place was, when we were in class and we were talking about the difference in price between a half a pound of peaches or peaches by the pound and, chicken thighs or whatever. And I think the thing that we also have to bring into this conversation, particularly about flooding, is who is going to be more likely to recover the fastest and who will not. And I think that's the other side of COVID that we also have to talk about when we talk about, like who is going to come out of this okay. And right now, it's especially in the U.S., we can see that black people are not coming out all right with this. I don't fuck with Herman Cain too hard, but he, you know, he did die from COVID. And he did put that dumbass tweet up talking about no mask, the girls are tired. So, I mean, he's my Morehouse brother, so I'm not going to give him too much, but that's, it is an example, unfortunately, whether he wanted to be or not. To me, this is an example of, first of all, the things and people you put on pedestals and who will be there for you in the end, but also, becoming the the person that you may not have expected to become. And, that's all I'm going to give for Herman. But the reality is that black folks are being impacted the most. And then if just like Hurricane Katrina impacted poor neighborhoods more, even though everything was destroyed, some people were able to come back and some people were not. And
What were you
which
gonna
does
say? Keep
okay,
going, Veron.
sorry. Sorry. Um, it does bring up the question in terms of especially America with flooding because of this neoliberal quote unquote government um, and society that we live in, and that government is the problem and not the solution. What happens when a dam
yes,
collapses on your house, or that a, a field of farming that you make your income from? What happens then? Like, you do assume that the government is going to do something, right? And yet, like,
right.
in the neoliberal mindset, it's like the government is the problem. So I think people really are confused in this sense. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely in America, there's this idea that the government is going to help if something horrible happens because that's what a
What
correct.
the government does.
And yet,
Right.
the people who've been in power so much have taken away the government's ability to help in the sense of like not investing in, let's say, the pandemic unit
Right.
or these types of things.
Stockpiling masks and yeah.
Yeah. And so um, I think that's something that people really need to think about. Is government the problem, or is, let's say, not taxing corporations that make trillions of dollars?
Thank you.
Why don't you think about that if you are not one of the people who make trillions of dollars or even billions or millions?
Yeah. I think, if nothing else, I hope this show shows that like the government low key doesn't give not a nair shit about its people, and that's the wrong way around. And it's as much as we are appalled by the things that America does, we can't also forget that there are other atrocities going on in other countries. And because this is not just these are not things that are just aimed at the people. It's also aimed at the planet. These decisions to manufacture, these decisions to make chemicals. Like, I don't know if you've had a chance, because I was having a rough patch, so I decided to kind of soothe myself by watching some TV. So I watched like a whole nerd. I watched Radioactive, the movie about Marie Curie, the baddest bee of science. I did a project on radium in school, so I was very fond of her from a very early age. And I just remember seeing her like literally like breaking up coal, just breaking up coal. And it's like, they showed like, they kind of melded together the past with the present and showing how radium was used, for x-rays and things like that. And it was a really good and interesting, like, the movie was really good, but like when they did a breakdown of how much water, how much coal, and and everything that they had, the materials that they had to use to make this discovery. And it's like I'm still wrestling with the fact, like, was it actually worth it? Was it worth the damage that was probably done to make that discovery? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many things like that, though. Like, when you think about the environmental impact of making movies, like cinema,
Oh yeah, oh God, yeah.
all the fires and the burning cars and the whatever else they do in the
So
cinema.
true. Oh my
It's all
God, you were
just
so right.
environmental impact as well. It's just, is it worth it?
And
With
you know
what's
what?
worth what, you
Right.
know?
And you know what else? Like, we have to bring into this too. We have to bring into this conversation what an environmental assessment is, and like what who's not doing it. Like, so for example, and I've talked about the about NEPA before. That's the National Environmental Policy Act, and that was signed in 1970. And as part of this, the CEQ, the Council on Environmental, I think it's Environmental Quality, they're supposed to make sure that there are enforcements of this law and assessments done if there is some adverse environmental impact, if there's some event that occurs like a spill or something along those lines that could potentially require federal action. So this process didn't get started of doing environmental assessments until like the 1980s. And I mean, do I really need to go into like what had happened already? Like 3M was a happening. Well, 3M was a booming by that point. I mean, so it's just like I wanted to bring that into the conversation too, because like, did you see anything about China doing any environmental assessments or having done any?
Right. Yeah, they just started doing environmental assessments recently. So
Oh, oh God.
I don't know. I don't know enough about the process there, but at least it's found valuable enough to start doing.
Oh, I was just gonna say, but like the problem is that like you're doing an assessment after the fact.
You know,
Right.
like
I mean,
you know
sometimes
what I'm
it's
saying?
done before, but it
Yeah, that's true.
definitely has been more so the opposite. But
Yeah. And with the rate that things have gone in the US in regards to all the environmental acts that Cheeto Von Ass Clown has completely ripped to shreds. I mean, I
uh,
refuse to call that man by his name. Like, refuse. So you won't hear it on this show, girl. Not on here.
I
But
don't want to ever hear his name again. Uh, Sadly, I don't think I'll get my wish.
I don't think so either.
But no, I mean, yeah, it is strange. I mean, he's definitely sort of mentally ill, but to to not want, like, to basically bring the species of human species to extinction as fast as possible doesn't seem like a very good
Yeah.
idea. But
No, no. But that's where we're heading. The earth would be so happy if we would all just go away.
so, I
I
mean, it's
mean,
the only one it hurts is us. So, thank you,
yeah.
Cheeto.
Like, just when you think about what alternatives, do you think about any alternatives to dams? Like, are there things that we could do instead of dams or to really make them work for us? You know, like, I know hydropower is considered to be a use of renewable energy, but like, is it though? Is it really?
Well, I
I
mean,
don't know. I'm not.
that's the thing is like I think people's viewpoints are changing in the sense that nuclear used to be a quote unquote green energy
Oh my gosh, you are so
alternative
right.
because
Jesus
it did not
Christ.
emit CO2. But obviously, it's never worth the risk. So
Yeah.
um, I think that dams and hydropower are getting recognized differently more and more as a problematic, um, quote unquote, renewable resource
Mm-hmm.
because the detriment of the dam itself
Right.
is not is too great an impact on the ecosystems and then to things like um, reservoir induced
Mm,
seismicity, um, where the dam reservoirs are filled and then emptied, and this causes earthquakes. So, because of
right.
the pressure on the earth and the fault lines, and like, is that worth it?
Mm,
What if there's billions of dollars in damages from that earthquake that the dam caused, or X amount of people dying? Like, I think there's
right.
definitely more conversations about these things and the repercussions, and more um, emphasis maybe on wind, solar, geothermal, instead of just sort of large scale nuclear and hydropower, and sort of like micro
Hmm.
power plants where each city
Yes.
has a small or each small city, but each sort of section of a city has its own power generator instead of some sort
Yes.
of central.
Massive.
Grid. Yes.
So, I
Yes.
mean, I
I
think people are
completely
thinking about
agree.
it now, but it definitely is taking a lot of catastrophe to sort of force the issue in a large scale setting, especially when we have a president who does not believe in climate change. So it's slow
Yeah.
going, but
And you,
it's
And it's costing us. And even in going back to China, like, how many there's so many people died because of the massive flooding that's going on. And it's like, when I did some research, like, it's very sparse. There's not a lot of information about it. I know folks are talking about it. I brought it up on Twitter, and people were responding, but you know, like, where is the massive amounts of of coverage about this. That's disturbing. It's disturbing to know that people are losing their homes, their lives. They have no way of sheltering themselves, and it's not being discussed.
Yep.
So they're basically, suffering in silence. Wow, this got real morbid, friend.
Well, I mean, it's always good to hear your voice, so barely noticed.
Oh my God. So as we're coming to Oh my God, this is just like last time.
I know.
I mean, the last time we recorded, but also like our lit ass group chat. Shout out to the coldest cohort. We're like a gang. We really are, like, people. Or no, I think we're sort of like Mean Girls, where like the girls are just like wow. I don't know who's who, but I feel like we're definitely.
Well, I guess
I think
I'm making up for not being a mean girl any other time, like in high school or middle school. I was like
Yeah, I wasn't a mean girl either.
I was
I
the
was like,
one the
please don't
mean
be mean to
girls
me.
were mean to.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I was in the band. I was just a mess. No, I wasn't. I was cool as hell. I was just nerdy. But I was well dressed.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we're coming to the close of the show, are there any shout outs that you want to give? Any things you want to plug that you're working on right now?
My never-ending psychogeography project I'm still working on, so
Okay. You're going to have to like come back on and talk about that.
yeah, we should do that one.
That's it? Oh, girl. All right. So I cannot with you. Franz, thank you. Thank you for being here. I always drag you. Well, hopefully it's fun for you, but I'm definitely like, hey, be on the show right now. And you're like, how about Friday, girl? So I can actually have a chance to prepare myself. You're such a good sport, and I really appreciate it. The last time we did this, we were together in LA in Jane's office, and now we're 3,000 miles apart in quarantine.
Yeah. Sadly.
God. To brighter days, friend.
Yes.